and thank you for joining Infotex for this movie presentation. Find our tour page for upcoming webinars and workshops, and movies for most of our past webinars. That's tour.infotex.com. Please know that at the end of this presentation are several legal disclaimers. These disclaimers explain the links shown on your screen. And now, it's our pleasure to introduce you to our webinar moderator, the code curator and special envoy from the SEAM, Michael Hardkey. Michael?
Hi, my name is Michael Hardkey, and I'm the moderator of today's presentation, Vulnerability Management for the Board of Directors. This is a movie that Infotex has produced in hopes to help board of directors understand what an uphill battle network engineers and information security officers face in small community-based banks when it comes to turning our patch management program into a vulnerability management program. And now I'd like to introduce our presenter. He has 13 letters after his name. He's the managing partner for Infotex. He speaks regularly to boards of directors as well as management team members and of course information security officers and small community-based banks. With that, I will turn control over to the one and only Dan Hadaway. Dan?
Thank you very much, Michael. This is what I look like a lot, providing basic information security education to users and to customers and of course board members. And I also have the honor to speak on a regular basis to these two characters here. We call this guy here Joe ISO, and this person here is Jane ISO. And I know they're our clients, but we believe they're superheroes. And as superheroes, they need your help. You see, they have always struggled in the battle against a super cyber villain, one that we used to call patch management. And now, thanks to your help, we're going to win this battle against the super bad guys. Because if you can understand what we're trying to do, that understanding and empathy might just be what we need to tackle the problem. And while it is going to cost a little bit of money, and we'll talk about that when we get to this third thing here, which by the way, PM stands for patch management and VM stands for vulnerability management. Awareness is what we really feel is a big part of the battle. And so by your attending this webinar, you're going to help us attack this problem and turn this, continual lemon into lemonade. So what we'd like to do first is start off with a little review and then dive into the history of patch management and then describe what needs to happen in order for us to change patch management into vulnerability management. And so imagine the last time you bought a new car, right? And what was nice about buying the car new is that the manufacturer of that car would keep track of whenever there was a problem with the car, and they would issue a recall, right? And then you'd take your car into the dealership, the dealer would fix whatever problem happened to be with the car, and you'd get your car back and it'd be like new. Well, that's kind of what patch management is like. Unfortunately, in the 21st century, software publishers don't have to release software that is completely, working when it's first released. If software publishers were in the manufacturing industry, they would quickly go out of business and they wouldn't be in the manufacturing industry anymore. And the reason why is because not only do they get to release their software with all kinds of security vulnerabilities and all kinds of problems in it, but they require us to fix those problems, not the dealership. And they can even announce a sunset date, meaning the day that they're no longer going to fix the problems. And we have all agreed to all of that when we hit the accept button on the license agreement. The whole process is established to help software publishers mitigate the legal risk that they face because they're releasing software with security problems in it. And guess what? If you're a non-technical board member, I bet you've heard of the very technical term patch management. And that's probably because, like a lot of other smaller banks, patch management is the problem that's causing the symptoms that you see when you see the audit reports. So the findings that you're seeing in your audit reports are very often symptoms of a patch management process that is just simply not working. And we need to stop this, right? We can't keep finding vulnerabilities in our audits. And you want to know why? Because if the auditors can find the vulnerabilities, guess what? So can the bad guys. Now, technical people might bristle a little bit at me describing patch management as being like recall on your new auto, because you, not the dealership, gets to fix the issue. And when I say you, really, it's the technical team, right? And they spend a huge amount of time fixing issues that come with the software that we rely on in order to do our jobs. And just so you know, it's not as easy as just replacing a part on a car. Very often, patches will blow up other processes. The software publishers are different companies. And so Microsoft might release a patch that blows up something in the Adobe realm, or Adobe might release a patch that blows up something in the Oracle, applications or whatever. But making things worse, imagine the problem here being so great that every month you have to haul your car into the dealership to get a new problem fixed. That's what we're dealing with in patch management. We actually now have a phrase called Patch Tuesday, which is the day of the month. It's the second Tuesday of every month where Microsoft releases all the fixes to their buggy software. And if you have seen our movies and our webinars about the canary in the coal mine, suffice it to say, this is a sick bird. This patch management problem is something we've got to fix, because it's the last bastion of vulnerabilities left in our bank's network. And it's really the only place that the bad guys, I shouldn't say the only, of course, they can still call up our employees and ask for account balances and that sort of thing. But when it comes to a huge breach blowing everything up, it's usually the unpatched vulnerability that starts the whole process falling apart. What I'd like to do next really is to dive into the history. I've kind of learned that maybe one way to help you understand where we are now is to help you kind of learn how we got here, right? In the late 1990s, just so you know, Microsoft didn't even have a network application or a network operating system until about 1996, when they came out with Windows NT. But it was before the turn of the century that Microsoft finally fessed up and said, yes, we're releasing software that has all kinds of security bugs in them. And because of that, in the early 2000s, we evolved to what we now call Patch Tuesday, where once a month, Microsoft patches its operating system. And shortly after that, third-party applications, what we call third-party applications, started producing patches for their systems as well. And most of the third-party applications are either made by Adobe or Oracle, but suffice it to say, if there's an application out there that has a security bug, the publisher of that application will now release a patch for it in order to mitigate their own legal risk. But really, until 2007, we as an information security consultancy had an uphill battle just helping banks realize that we need to get our arms around this problem. We need to start getting out in front of this problem, because there's real bad guys out there that are going to exploit these vulnerabilities if we're not careful. But in 2007, an application named Zeus came onto the marketplace, so to speak, really the dark marketplace, the black market. The dark web is what we all call it now. And in 2007, you were able to, download at no cost an application called Zeus. What I always find interesting is, number one, though the application's in English, if you need any help, you're going to have to learn Russian, because Zeus was published by the Russian Business Network, which was a syndicate in Russia at the time. I don't know if they're still around. But I also found it interesting that they copyright their software. I don't think they use the American court system to enforce their copyright. I suspect they probably use weapons to enforce their copyright, but suffice it to say, this scared the heck out of the industry, because what Zeus was meant to do, at least initially, was help people who weren't really technical attack American banks. Zeus comes with all kinds of modules, or it came with all kinds of modules. One module was meant to attack mobile banking. Another module had all of the IP addresses of American banks in it. Another module could allow you to design your own virus so that you can stay under the radar of antivirus applications. And so once Zeus arrived, it caused enough concern to where banks started focusing in on what we now call patch management. And really, in other words, another way to put that is the rest is history. That's really when we started this process that we're trying to finish now. And I really feel like it's important for you to understand that even though we have this process in place to address these known vulnerabilities, there are far more unknown vulnerabilities than there are now. That, for every vulnerability, there's probably 1,000 unknown vulnerabilities. And so, that's one thing that, we still have to face, is even if we are fully patched, there still may be vulnerabilities in our system. Meanwhile, anymore, if somebody clicks on the link, that brings malware into your system, or say they open an attachment that they shouldn't have opened, those applications, the attachment that has the malware in it, that malware actually leverages the vulnerabilities that should have been patched on your network before the malware ended up on that network. And so, if we don't have fully patched systems, we are really exposed to a lot of risk. Meanwhile, there are hundreds of applications out there now, like Zeus, that are free on the dark web, and they're meant to discover and exploit vulnerabilities that people may still have in their systems, even after they've gone through a huge amount of effort to patch those systems. This metric right here is getting a little bit old, but I love it because it helps make my point, which is in 2017, 85% of the breaches that were reported were breaches that started from malware exploiting vulnerabilities where patches were already available. In other words, forget the unknown vulnerabilities. We're not fixing the known vulnerabilities, and that's causing breaches on our networks. Now, this is all a lot easier said than done. Very, very a lot easier said than done. And I mean, if you think about it, these were the critical patches that were released in 2015. And I apologize for the age of the metric, but that was the last time we counted this. And let's just say that on average, and by the way, I don't know how long it takes to patch devices. That all depends on the patch. It all depends on the device. It all depends on the person doing the patching. It all depends on everything else going on. It probably takes less time if there's only one patch released on, Patch Tuesday than if there's 1,000 released the same day. But let's just say that it takes 10 minutes on average to apply a security patch to a desktop. Then in 2015 alone, Microsoft required us to spend 1,500 minutes patching desktops. Do you want to know what 1,500 minutes is? That's 25 hours. That's like 3 days spent just patching the security patches for Microsoft. And by the way, that's only on the desktop. All right, and that doesn't include the other 6,000 patches that weren't security patches. That's outrageous. 3 days. Now let's, say I'm wrong about that. Let's say it only takes 3 minutes. Well, that's 1 day. That's 1 day of somebody's life just dedicated to the top priority patches in 2015. And I also want to stress, this doesn't include servers. We're just talking about desktops here. We draw these kind of drawings on a regular basis. Now, we actually call this a cyber kill chain. I feel like from a non-technical perspective, it would be better to call it an anatomy of an attack. This attack vector happens to be a corporate account takeover. You might be familiar with this from other board awareness training. This is the attack vector that costs banks the most amount of money. And I want to point out that in every single one of the cyber kill chains I've drawn in the last 3 or 4 years, these 2 words are in there: exploit vulnerability. The breach cannot occur usually if we don't exploit vulnerabilities on your system. And so we want to turn patch management into vulnerability management. And in order to do that, we want the board to understand what vulnerability management equals. And so to us, patch management is like this. We find the patches. Usually we're supposed to test the patches, but most smaller community-based banks, what they do is they wait, maybe they apply the patch on a couple endpoints and wait to see if it blows anything up. And if everything looks good, then they apply the patch across the enterprise, and then we start all over, find the patches, wait to make sure they don't blow anything up, apply the patch across the enterprise, et cetera, et cetera. Well, what we'd like to do is we'd like to move to a process that begins with awareness training, and that's really why you are here watching this movie, and I really appreciate the fact that you're willing to spend this time. But then we want to prioritize our patches. We want to work on those 150 critical patches that Microsoft released first, and then we can get to the other 6,000 patches that aren't so critical. And then beyond that, the most important part, and by the way, this is the part that's going to cost a little bit of money, we want to test before the auditors come in to make sure that our patch management system worked, that we fully patched every asset on our system, that we followed the priorities that we had established when we established those priorities. And this patch management process that we've been using since 2007 isn't working. We're still ending up with audit findings that when you trace them back to what caused this audit finding, about 85% of the time, it's poor patch management. And so what we'd like to do is we'd like to change this process into a vulnerability management process that starts with a board level policy. Now, you may have already been looking at a policy to approve. Usually it's just a paragraph that you're going to insert into your information security program if you're FDIC bank, or your IT governance program, or your risk management policy, whatever top level policy you have that addresses these kind of high level policy issues without having to have a standalone policy. You're going to be approving in the next couple weeks or so. And that policy really is going to require that we continue to find the broken applications on our network, but then we prioritize what we're going to do about those patches during the waiting period. We're still going to test to make sure they don't blow anything up, that sort of thing, but we're also going to focus in on the critical patches first, the patches that the publisher has identified as being a security patch, meaning that if we don't apply that patch, we have risk. And the patches that, are fixing, nuisances or bugs or feature patches or whatever, we're going to put them lower priority than the security patches. From there, then, of course, we're going to apply the patch, but then the final and most important part probably of this process is we're going to then test to make sure that we did get the patches on all of the assets. What we're going to do is we're going to scan our network using the same tools that the auditors, and as importantly, the same tools that our bad guys are using to find vulnerabilities on the network. And this is where the money comes in, by the way. And it's not that much money. And by the way, Infotex doesn't sell any of this stuff. So I'm hoping you're not thinking that this is a sales pitch, but you might have already heard the terms Nessus or Qualys, which are the two vulnerability scanning applications that most smaller community-based banks are using nowadays to test to make sure that we did get all of the systems patched. And by the way, it's a lot easier said than done. I mean, finding, we got 100 assets and the patch is made on all but 3 of those assets. for some reason, getting the patches back on those 3 assets is a lot easier said than done. And it's usually because maybe it's a laptop that was gone for somebody's vacation while the patch was applied, or maybe somebody shut off their workstation and so we couldn't apply the patch on it, or maybe a workstation's in repair or whatever. But suffice it to say, we need to establish that policy. We need to create a method for prioritizing the patches. We need to create a method for testing. But then most importantly, once we've got the list of where we did not complete the job, we want to follow up and make sure we do dot the I and cross the T. Again, it's a lot easier said than done. If you're a bank that's originally setting up their patch, their vulnerability management system, another important aspect of the policy that we're encouraging our smaller community-based banks to do is to be sure that the person who tests the patches is not necessarily the same person who's in charge of applying the patches. That segregation solves a lot of issues, not just operational. And so we really encourage our banks to work towards that. A lot easier said than done, especially in the smaller community-based banks where you have the resources in terms of team members to be able to pull that off. One last thing I really want to make sure you understand before we move into describing what's actually going to change here. But we're still not going to have 0 findings in our vulnerability assessments, all right? And so I want to make sure I set that expectation correctly. What we should have is 0 high-risk findings, 0 critical risk findings, maybe even 0 moderate risk findings. But what we're learning is that if we have to chase around those 6,000 low-risk patches, it makes us harder to ensure that we're fixing all of the high-risk patches. And so we're really hoping that the application providers are doing a good job on their risk assessments, because we're using their declaration as to how important the patch is to prioritize those patches. Now, what's going to change is that, we're going to still have a never-ending process. It's still going to be a cycle. It's still going to be something that we constantly are chasing. But instead of being a sprint that we lose, we're going to get into a marathon, right? We're going to continually test. We're going to continually work to improve our methodologies. We're going to try to fine-tune our system so that we don't have to deal with the same false positive more than once. We're going to make sure that instead of everything based, the risk-based system delivers a process where the success is measured by the overall risk in your network rather than how many patches we don't have applied. And so I want to end by really, encouraging you to go out and read this article that we have on our blog. If you go to my.infotex.com/patches, it's written for non-technical people. It pretty much summarizes everything I've said today. And one last thing, I want to also stress to you that your information security officer, Joe or Jane ISO, are very, very happy that you spent 25 minutes or so it's going to take to get through this movie, because by your dedicating this time to learning what vulnerability management is, you're helping everybody in the process with their job, and we feel that job is very, very important.
When you view an InfoTex webinar or movie, you do so with 4 caveats. First, you're agreeing to the terms posted at the web page listed on this slide. Second, our lawyers want you to know that what InfoTex presents is often time-dated or about new trends, regulations, or guidance, and therefore we cannot provide this material with any warranty whatsoever. Thirdly, material provided with InfoTex webinars and movies is copyrighted. You keep the copyright to material customized to your organization, but InfoTex reserves the right to use the material in other engagements and boilerplates. See our transfer of copyright agreement at the webpage listed in this slide. Finally, those who view our webinars or movies may be added to an email mailing list. If you do not wish to receive notice of additional educational opportunities, please accept our apologies and please opt out at the web page shown on this slide.